you think Taiwan is learning from this?
That's the good question, because what we've been talking about so far is we've talked about the problems the Russians have had. We've talked about what the Chinese are going to do as a result, and how the Chinese are just going to get things right and sort of, as they see it, improve their odds for successfully taking Taiwan. But Taiwan does have a good hand to play if it gets some help. But the Ukraine events, I think, have had the effect that Hong Kong had on Taiwan, that the Chinese strangling Hong Kong year and a half ago, are still doing it. That woke a lot of Taiwanese people up to the idea that the threat was immediate, that it was coming, and what happened to Hong Kong was a foretaste of what would happen to them if they come under Chinese communist rule. So they've sort of woken up, and you think, well, weren't they already woken up? Well, not as they should be. And so it has had, I think, an effect on Taiwan's sense of things, and it does seem to have led to some more political support for improving military capabilities, even some initial talk of a civil defense scheme. There's always been people around who've been trying to improve Taiwan's capabilities, but this gives them a little more support, a little more oomph, and even on the American side, there seems to be a little more attention being paid to it as well. But Taiwan does need some more economic support. I would immediately make a free trade agreement between the Americans and Taiwan to help them sort of beef up their economy more. But back to Taiwan's defense. Say it does, even if China does all of the recalculations, and that it could still find itself in a lot of trouble if Taiwan sets up its defense the right way. And that's partly the result of the capabilities of modern weapons. If Taiwan is armed with adequate numbers of precision-guided munitions, long-range missiles, anti-ship missiles, and this is basically a handsome word for something that you can shoot at something and you will hit it for sure from a long distance away. And so you could find the Chinese invasion fleets getting sunk in the harbors by Taiwanese missiles. The Chinese Air Force cannot establish control over Taiwan because Taiwan's air defense is so good. Chinese cyber defenses and electronic defenses are such that the Chinese can't shut them down. So Taiwan's leadership still operates. It's able to marshal the population. You have a potential for the Taiwanese improving their conventional military capabilities, and also getting the citizens into the act. And that's where the civil defense scheme that's now being talked about a bit, and an effort to improve the reserve forces in the way that the Ukrainians have shown that an armed citizenry, a good reserve force, territorial force, a good conventional force even, can make life difficult even for an overwhelmingly powerful military. And then the Americans, once again, if they see that the economic sanctions that we've applied on Russia, we're going to have to apply even better ones on the Chinese. That will go a long way as well towards shaping Chinese thinking. And the Chinese did not think that they didn't think anyone would stand up to a real show of force the way the Russians did. Well, it looks like people have, and maybe they would do the same in the event of a Taiwan scenario. So if Taiwan, can get its military configured the right way, get its population prepared, and get the necessary armaments, get the necessary political and economic support from its friends, that it actually has pretty good odds. But it requires, that civilized world to get its act together and make it, and actually decide for itself that thus far and no farther, that it is going to fight and defend on behalf of Taiwan, and the Japanese need to get into the mix as well.
Do you think that the U.S. should stop the strategic ambiguity policy? Like, should they say that they would defend Taiwan?
Yeah, I think they need to. I think they need to make it clear that, say, no more. We have our core interests, we have our red lines, and this is it. You can do it quietly, and what I would do is, rather than worry about the language that's used. I would just do everything that you would normally do, that you think you need to do to allow Taiwan to defend itself and to be willing to defend, for us to be willing to defend Taiwan. Just do it. And if anyone asks you, well, why are you doing it? The right answer is, well, you can see. That's why we're doing it.
So joint military drills, that sort of thing.
Well, yes, if and I say absolutely flooding the place with anti-ship missiles, with anti-aircraft missiles, anti-aircraft systems. How many do they need? Well, one more is usually the right number, but you need thousands of these things. Work smart minds into the equation. And these are like not the dumb minds that float and wait for something to hit them, but sail out and listen to an acoustic signature and go after it. But I would say you would give them everything they need and more. And that's where Ukraine has shown a huge vulnerability when fighting these kinds of wars, is that people didn't realize how fast they expend these modern precision weapons. And you've got to make sure Taiwan has plenty of them, and that it has a lot more than it has what they need, and has more than the Chinese have in mind. But what you've mentioned about that joint training, that's key to everything. And that is that the Americans have to take the lead and have to break Taiwan out of this 40 years of isolation, where we've had effectively no serious military-to-military engagement with them. And if you're not willing to do that, then you've reduced your odds of success considerably. But if you break them out of the isolation, it improves their military capabilities, it improves their ability to work with us as well. And if we're going to supposedly defend them, it does help if we've had some familiarity with them before we get started. It also has a huge psychological effect on Taiwan's political class, its citizenry, to see that they actually do have some friends who are willing to deal with them. And it will cause others to get into the mix. If we go first, the Japanese will also. And not just militarily, but economically. The Australians as well might get in, and there may be some others who want in on the action, or see that it as their duty is more like it. But you do have to, address that isolation. And we haven't done it. No administration has yet, but it needs to be done, and needs to be done tomorrow. Also, a last word I'd put in for Taiwan's defense is we talk a lot about hardware, but it's the people. It's the people in the military, the people who do the fighting and dying, that need a lot more support than they have gotten to date. They need the respect that you will give that they deserve. They need pay them, what they deserve, and you'll be able to attract more volunteers into the military. But the personnel end of a national defense really needs to get a lot more attention in Taiwan than it has gotten to date. And it's an easy thing to deal with. But generally, it's not a vote getter, I suppose. But that's something that really does need addressed, because we hear a lot about the hardware and these very effective weapons. But we don't talk about the human aspect of it in a defense. But we need to do that.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Grant. And if people want to learn more, where can they read some of your thoughts on this stuff?
Well, most of what I write is published at Center for Security Policy. If you type me and Center for Security Policy into the internet, you'll find it. Also, I think I have a Twitter thing that I now and then use. I think it's at Newsham Grant, or whatever the Twitter thing is. You can see I'm not the most self-promoting guy on earth. And I am on LinkedIn as well. But if you type Grant Newsham into the internet, stuff will come up. But Center for Security Policy has most of it.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Grant.
Sure, glad to be here. Thanks a lot.
One thing I'm really getting from this is that the Chinese Communist Party is not really afraid to take on Taiwan in isolation, but what they are afraid of is these alliances.
Oh, yeah. Have you seen how much they hate NATO?
Yeah.
Like, they really, really, like, all of the propaganda coming out of the Chinese Communist Party lately is not just about how terrible America is, but it's about how terrible NATO is, and connecting that through the U.S.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to convince everyone. Yeah. So basically, what we in the West need to do is form a Megazord.
Oh, gosh. Like Power Rangers.
Basically, yeah.
So Is NATO a Megazord?
Yes. And NATO's a Megazord, and then like the Quad is a Megazord. And if
And
you
then
combine,
AUKUS is a
yeah,
Megazord?
exactly. So if you combine multiple Megazords, you get a Mega Megazord.
Yeah, is that the technical term?
That's a technical term.
I think I stopped watching Power Rangers before they got to the Mega
Yeah,
Megazord part.
I feel like also me knowing a Power Rangers reference really like shows my age. Oh my gosh, you know what really upset me? So we were covering Sweden and Finland wanting to join NATO.
Yes.
And I realized the prime minister of Finland is younger than me.
How old is she?
She's like, I think 35 or something like that.
Oh, well, she's not that much
I know.
younger than
She
you.
was elected at 34, something like that. Anyway, it got to me. Okay, like she doesn't even know
I understand.
Power Rangers.
No, people definitely know Power Rangers in their mid-30s.
Okay, yes, that makes me feel slightly better.
I know Power Rangers. Chris knows Power Rangers. My sister knows Power Rangers. Like, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So the prime minister understands the Megazord concept, and that's why she wants to join NATO. I think
that makes sense. You know, I didn't realize that until very recently that the Power Rangers, like all of the footage of them fighting and all that stuff, was from the Japanese show, and the only things they filmed for the American version were the kids in the high school, like their non-costume selves, and then the voiceovers, obviously.
Yeah, I mean it's a very clever show where when the main characters are always in like a full face covering costume.
Right?
Yeah,
then you
can
save
just
so
swap
much
it
money.
to any language. Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah. Anyway, but speaking of Megazords, I think
that's a phrase you don't hear often, but go on.
Well, I think that, you know, what Grant said about how China may not be afraid of, and in fact may prefer to start a wider conflict immediately in terms of taking over Taiwan. I hadn't really considered that before. The idea that they might purposely try to get North Korea involved, or
right, and Russia. So they're going to have their own Megazord. So like this is not going to be an easy battle.
It's going to be a really janky knockoff Megazord, though.
That's true. Well,
if the components are, yeah, I mean, maybe the only thing worse than made in China quality might be made in North Korea quality.
Yeah, but I also don't think that's like, I don't think we should rely on it being poor quality to like be like, oh, well, we're going to succeed against it, because look at all the poor quality stuff that's made in China that has flooded the markets around the world that we're relying on. So,
yeah, but okay,
right? No, their military there are some quality issues, but also there are some issues where they've done a very capable job of building up, for example, the Navy. So, you know, it's not going to be, even if they have a janky knockoff Megazord, it's not going to necessarily be easy for our Megazords to fight it.
There's one more thing I want to talk about, which is not as fun as Megazords, but I think it's a pretty interesting and important thing to bring up, which is China's elite capture of all these different countries, right? Like going after the elite with bribery and all these things.
Right.
I think the reason they didn't think about the backlash that would happen from that, and the reason that it's kind of falling apart in some of these places, is because they don't really have any experience with public, like the people being able to really influence what the government does, right?
Yeah, so like they can be corrupt in China and they don't face a real backlash from that.
Yeah,
because they control the media, they control the military, they control the organization department, which is what appoints everyone.
Well, they control, you know, internal security apparatus. Like everybody's afraid, right? So it works better in, you know, dictatorships than it does in freer countries where there are actually elections. So, you know, they can come in and bribe an African dictator, and there's not a lot of backlash, even though people hate what's happening in their countries.
Right, but in South Korea, it doesn't really work because the people, enough of them are sick and tired of it that
they can elect somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that is a key part of this whole equation, that it's kind of like how we talked about Russia made NATO great again on America Uncovered, and this is what the Chinese Communist Party is doing with their influence campaigns, with their elite capture, with their flooding these countries with, you know, Chinese investments, Chinese infrastructure taking over, putting them in debt. Like, it is something where they are creating their own nemesis.
So in other words, the Chinese Communist Party is making megazords great again.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's true. They are, like, you would never think that, like, AUKUS would really happen, right? Or the Quad. The Quad tried to happen about a decade ago, and then it kind of fizzled out, and then now it's back. And it is because people are worried about the Chinese Communist Party.